So, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks, Arnika, for the invitation to that webinar and for introduction. First of all, please apologize my partial indisposition because I'm not feeling very fit right now. I got something from my children, so I only want to say, please ask only easy questions, not complicated ones to give me a headache. So, and I also must say that I was really surprised to hear that about 100 participants joined or was about to join this event. In fact, it's far more people connected to that than to well-known international meeting of European Commission's working group EcoStat. So that's pretty good. And I think that if there were as many barriers yearly removed as there are meetings and webinars and talks about it, it would be a huge success. So, but now to the subject itself, I'll share my screen here. And disable me. So can you see it now? All right. So what do we do and what challenges we are facing in the implementation of the Article 9 of Nature Restoration Regulation in the Czech Republic? Well, I should switch. No. Just a quick reminder, what are the requirements of the Article 9? So member states shall, first of all, make inventory of artificial barriers to the connectivity of surface waters and identify barriers to be removed. Then they shall set up their national restoration plan, with the plan for removal of artificial barriers, giving priority to obsolete barriers, and also implement complementary measures to improve the natural functions of related floodplains. And then once these are restored, we shall also be sure that these functions, natural functions restored, are maintained. So this all should be done to restore river continuity and natural functions of floodplains. And this national restoration plan shall be prepared until 1st September this year. And among other requirements, there shall be inventory of practically all artificial barriers to longitudinal, lateral, and vertical connectivity of surface waters. And also, among others, there should be information about barriers as for use of the barrier, obsoleteness, and plan for the removal, if the barrier is going to be removed or not. And one important point also is to estimate free-flowing rivers like baseline in 2020, how many free-flowing rivers each member state have or had in 2020, and estimated length of free-flowing rivers to be achieved by 2030, 40, and 50. And it shall also contain total surface area subject to restoration measures to improve natural functions of floodplains. So what it all means, in fact, so to comply with the requirements, every member state should have detailed information about every single barrier in the country, in fact. It also means that to find out what Free-flowing rivers we already have, so we need to check it out by the free-flowing river methodology. So it means that all rivers with the potential to fulfill the criteria shall be assessed by this methodology. And also we need information whether the barriers which came out as a problem for river continuity can in practice be removed. So it means we need to know ownership, impact on land use, riverbank, stabilization, riverbed, what's its impact on flooding, sediment movements, and sediment movement, and so on. So it's not only what we wish, but what really can be done. Just briefly, what's the organization and who is responsible for Article 9 implementation in Czech Republic? The main responsibility is up to the Ministry of Environment and its Nature Conservation Agency for the Czech Republic, who is doing a good job there. And they work with close cooperation with the Ministry of Agriculture, because under Ministry of Agriculture comes institutions responsible for the management of watercourses and river basin management. So they are forests of the Czech Republic, and they are in charge of 39% of watercourses, mainly smaller ones. And we've got 5 river basin state enterprises. These are river basin management authorities and also watercourses managers of 55% of our river length. So as for the organization and some timeline, we had a first meeting at the end of 2023, where we introduced requirements of proposed regulation and the first draft of free-flowing river methodology. Then at the beginning of 24, before nature restoration regulation was adopted, the Ministry of Environment were preparing for that regulation by establishing working groups. So they established also a working group for Article 9. The participants are ministries, water management institutions, environment agency, universities, research institutions, NGOs, fishery managements. So this working group is in practice like decision-making and advisory and consultation body for river connectivity and functional floodplains restoration. Then from 2025, from the beginning, we started to work on the national barrier inventory. And from mid-25, we started to select suitable river stretches with the potential to fulfill free-flowing river criteria. And so the plan is that hopefully next month we shall begin with the actual assessment of selected river stretches by this free-flowing river methodology. And the nature restoration plan should go also at the end of next month to public consultation before approval by the government, and at the end of August it shall be sent to European Commission. So there is a lot of work which we, well, shall manage to do, but probably not. So the first task is to make inventory of artificial barriers, and the fact was that Czech Republic didn't have one national barrier database, but we've got several databases owned by different water management authorities and environment agency. So there is a strong need for creation of one national barrier database with attributes required by the Article 9. And this was the task for the Environment Agency to create this database. And so obviously there are many issues with exporting data from different sources. So there are different typology of the same barriers, different format of GIS records, overlap of barriers across different databases. The main problem, however, is different completeness of databases, where many small longitudinal barriers are missing from the databases. And for the lateral barriers, the situation is even worse. We've got missing lateral barriers are missing in the databases on most of the territory of Czech Republic. It depends on the water, on the river basin authority. Some has better database, some worse, but altogether many lateral barriers are simply missing. The reason was that the riverbank protection structures were not included in the evidence of objects in the past, although most rivers, especially in low altitude areas, have their riverbanks modified to some extent. And we also don't have required information about the current use, ownership of the barriers, and so this information are not included in the databases. Despite these troubles, we've got one project carried by Nature Conservation Agency of the Czech Republic. It's called Passportization of Small Watercourses, and from that project we've got quite comprehensive hydromorphology data, including barriers, and they surveyed about 27.5% of total river length. They were all mostly smaller rivers and brooks. And these data can be used for free-flowing river evaluation, but still the length of lateral barriers were not exactly measured, and also the permeability of barriers for fish and sediments were not subject to expert evaluation, so there still will be some supplementary work and field visits to have the free-flowing river status assessed correctly. And that's how the Czech National Barrier Inventory looks at the moment. Environment Agency managed to get all available data into one database. And so far, there is still a lot of work on that, but so far, as for the longitudinal barriers, we've got 117,000 barriers on 100,000 kilometers of watercourses. That's the length of watercourses in Czech Republic. But many small barriers are still missing there. So the estimation of real number of barriers is more than 200,000 barriers. Again, we've got limited information about the current use, possibility of removal, and so on. And for the lateral barriers, as I said, the map looks like that, but it's not complete at all. We've got very limited data, and as I said, most of the lateral barriers are now missing in the databases. And again, estimation is that we've got about 40% of the river, of the whole river net has modified riverbanks. So it could in practice mean that we may have about 40,000 kilometers of barriers to lateral connectivity throughout our, or in the territory of the Czech Republic. And the second task, second requirement of the Article 9 is identify barriers to be removed and make some time plan for their removal. To comply with this requirement, we need many information, and to decide which barriers can be removed. In practice, we need to know to what extent these barriers poses an obstacle to migration and sediment permeability, what benefit would be achieved by the removal of such barrier, and then the requirement to the length of restored river connectivity if we remove the barrier, and possible length of free-flowing rivers. But the main thing we need to know is real possibilities of barrier removal or modification. So we have to analyze we have to know who owns the barrier, the land use of impacted area, what's the impact of removal on the environment, as for the sediments, bank stabilization, invasive species migration, and so on. So it's not easy just say, okay, we would like to have this barrier removed, but before we put it down to the plan, we really need to know the real possibilities, whether we can remove it or not. And also to decide when barriers can be removed, to set up some timeline plan. Obviously, we need to know the extent of needed and possible restoration measures. And then, so we have to assess most of the, or a large proportion of at least those selected rivers by this free-flowing river methodology, to know where the problems are and what we need to do to solve it. And when we've got this information together, then only then we can set up some timeline and plan when we can which barriers remove. So this task to identify barriers to be removed, in practice, it can only be done after in-depth analysis of real situation of individual barriers, and after the assessment in line with free-flowing river methodology. And it's pretty clear that all that process cannot in practice be done within 2 years given by the nature restoration regulation, even if we started right at the day it was approved. So what we decided to do, what is our national approach to fulfill this requirement, how to go about it? We decided that we will concentrate our effort on the rivers where restoration measures will be beneficial, will be possible, and will improve and restore the ecological functions of rivers. So we think that only those rivers which we can still help to are now worth investing time and human resources and money to identify barriers to river continuity and search for all necessary information. Because we think, and it's not in our capabilities to look at every single barrier in the country, to provide every information needed for those, because there are many barriers we can't simply do anything about it. They will still be there. So we look, our priority are rivers which can yet be restored, at least partially. So the procedure is, first step is to create the national database of barriers. This is what we've got almost done. Then select rivers with the potential of fulfilling free-flowing river criteria, or at least partially. And then we also have to select localities or river stretches with the potential and possibility to restore the national functions of or natural functions of related floodplains, in line with Article 9. And after that, we have to obviously carry out the assessment by the free-flowing river methodology on these selected river stretches. And again, we decided to start with the most valuable ones. So those rivers which we think they may be fulfilling the criteria for free-flowing rivers already. Because nature restoration plan requires a baseline map of free-flowing rivers at 2020. So it's clear that we have to start to analyze this analysis from the best rivers to find out which are fulfilling the criteria and which are not. And we've got a lot of missing data about the barriers. And again, we decided not to waste time on the river stretches, which we can't really help to. And so missing data from National Barrier Inventory will be added gradually from the information obtained during the free-flowing river analysis. So while we will be doing the analysis, we have to know about the barriers anyway. So we will fill the gaps in the inventory throughout this process. And also restoration measures and timeline will be planned during the evaluation process. So now, how we selected the river stretches with the potential of fulfilling the FFR criteria? Well, we said or thought that we find the most valuable river stretches within the water bodies which are already in high or good ecological status. So the theory is that water bodies with very good ecological status in most of the biological quality elements will be the least impacted, including hydromorphological pressures. So we based our selection on sort of best to worst approach according to the classification of ecological status. And in practice, this means sort of three-step selection. Selection of first, we selected these water bodies with high and good ecological status based on selected criteria. Then we select suitable river stretches or rivers within these catchments of these selected water bodies. And at the end, we made final screening on the rest of the water bodies and looked for the rivers which could be less impacted and could fulfill the FFR criteria, even though they are in like worst evaluated water bodies. So that's just an example how we select water bodies. We used two biological indicators, microinverts and fish, and three hydromorphological ones. Is barrier to migration, riverbed alternations, and impoundment. And we sorted these water bodies according to this criteria from best to worst. So we now know where to look for suitable rivers and river stretches. And then we selected the river stretches within these water body catchments. And the way we do it was we examine all the water bodies or all the catchments of those water bodies on the basis of best available data about barriers, fish populations, land use, delineated fish migration corridors, protected areas, and other factors related to restoration possibilities. So basically, we use the maps and GIS sliders in combination with expert knowledge, and We looked for the rivers longer than 3 kilometers in every water body catchment, and concentrate our, or we looked for the possibility to fulfill the individual FFR criteria. So then all rivers were classified according to the probability of fulfilling this criteria and were sorted into 5 categories according to their current status. So we basically made this selection from the available sources, from the map, and we didn't go as much to the detail because there was no time for that. So this is just first proposal, and then we will go deep into that details while we will assess those rivers according to the methodology of free-flowing rivers. As for the categories, these are an examples. So to the category 1, these rivers are those who, at the moment, in the current status, they most likely meet these free-flowing river requirements. So it means that from available information, from the map, and from our knowledge, there are no obvious barriers within the watercourse or river stretch itself. And there is also no barrier for fish and sediment movement in a large-scale assessment. It means downstream and upstream, so fish can migrate into this river stretch if needed, and sediments can go into that river stretch from the catchment above. And obviously, we found these stretches only in mountain and higher altitude areas. So that's the best category. Then category number 2 is they are still very little impacted rivers, and these are rivers which likely meet the requirements for being free flowing at the river stretch scale, but there can be pressures from up or downstream catchments. So these large-scale criteria need to be verified. So there could be impact on sediment transport and fish migration upstream and downstream. Again, these rivers are found mostly in higher altitudes where water reservoirs or weirs up or downstream of the stretch could affect the longitudinal connectivity. So then there is a category 3, which means that there are some more pressures, more criteria need to be verified. With high probability, free-flowing river criteria are not met right now, but restoration measures shouldn't be or could be relatively easily to achieve. These rivers are more impacted, but they still got preserved natural riverbed morphology, with no obvious reservoirs built directly on the watercourse. So these are highly valuable rivers or stretches where impact of barriers could be mitigated. So the impact doesn't seem to be in that order bad. And again, problem can be large-scale assessment there. And into the category 4, we add rivers which we are sure they don't meet requirements for free-flowing rivers at the moment, and also restoration measures may be pretty complicated or even impossible. But at least some mitigation measures should be implemented on these rivers because they are often delineated as main fish migration corridors, and they are very important habitats for native fish species. So in other words, these rivers are worth of effort, restoration effort, because they've got still preserved hydromorphology, but they are more impacted by human activity, but still they are so valuable that we could concentrate on our effort on them. And the last category, these are water body catchments, water bodies or rivers where restoration effort would be mostly ineffective due to combination of also many other factors. So these are rivers and water bodies where, with many water reservoirs in the catchment, fish ponds, they are hydropower plants, they've got highly modified riverbeds, they are in agriculture and urban areas. So simply these rivers, these are those rivers where any restoration measure is not really that effective. So we can't, simply said, save these rivers anymore. So that's just how the table with these individual watercourses selected looks like. We add some supplementary information about the pressures from the free-flowing river methodology point of view, whether there is a problem with sediments, e-flow, lateral barriers, and so on. And here finally are the results of our selection for the whole country. So we've got about 1,200 rivers or river stretches longer than 3 kilometers, which fell into those 4 categories, which are worth of restoration effort. And it means or in kilometers, it's about 10,000 kilometers of rivers. But to explain that, it's not like real number, because we selected rivers or river stretches longer than 3 kilometers, but it doesn't mean that all the selected river will fulfill the criteria. So we will look at the river, but it doesn't mean that all that river will count for those kilometers. So it will be certainly less than this number.